So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Trevor, and take it away.
All right, thank you, Jim. As y'all can see, if you can see my video, I'm joined by my cat here. She might pipe up with some advice she has at some point. Let's talk about Aivia Community. So Aivia Community is, like Jim said, a free tool that we have, and it's for viewing data of any size. So we let you open your data, clip it, slice it, and animate it, and even train pixel classifiers on it without buying Aivia at all. And I'll get into this in a second. There we go. So today, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the difference between Aivia, Aivia Web, and Aivia Community. You know, maybe in our communications, you've seen these three things, and it might not be quite clear what the difference is. I'm going to show a little bit about the Aivia interface. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because the hands-on portion of the workshop is going to take care of that for us. And before we start the hands-on workshop, I'm going to talk about a little bit of housekeeping on the Aivia Web, platform that we're going to use. So for the hands-on portion, we're going to first set up the interface. We're going to see how to load and calibrate a data set. We're going to adjust channels, so do some simple contrast things. We're going to manipulate things in 3D. We're going to slice in 3D. We're going to clip in 3D. We're also going to train a pixel classifier, which is included in Aivia Community as well. The goal today is to create a visualization of some segmentation results that we get. So you'll see that Aivia Community doesn't apply pixel classifiers and give you actual segmentation results, but using the preview function, we can get some really great visual representations of segmentations. And these are publication quality, so you can even do your science with this free tool. So what are the differences between these three products? What you see here is an overview currently of what Aivia is capable of. There's a lot of different use cases, and you can do a lot of different things with your data and get outcomes from your data in a lot of different formats. Aivia Web, the difference is you can do all of this, but it's hosted in a browser. So it's just Aivia, just in your browser, and hosted in the cloud, somebody else's computer basically, that you're renting time from. Aivia Community is a subset of Aivia, and you can only do some of this, but you can do it for free. Something that's not highlighted here that you can partially do for free is Pixel Classifier. And we'll spend quite a bit of time on that today. So here's what Aivia looks like loaded on your laptop. Aivia Web looks the same, just it's in a browser. And this is what we're going to be using today. So we are going to be using a full version of Aivia that you would have if you bought Aivia, but we're not going to explore functionality that's outside of what's in Aivia Community today. So you can take everything you learned today, you can do it in Aivia Community, and the only difference is that it will look like this. So there's a different background. We've got a little search function up here that I can talk about a little bit if you'd like to see. This is something that's new and coming in future versions of Aivia as well. But you can see that these programs all look the same. So the whole point of this is whatever you learn today, you can do in Aivia Community on your own workstation in the future. Okay, so for the interface, there are a few main panels that we have. So you can think of Aivia as being divided up like this. First, we've got this bar down at the bottom. So anytime I talk about the Image Explorer or the Video Animator, those tools are going to be found in this bottom bar here. Next is the viewer. This viewer is always there. It's not collapsible. It's not hideable. This is the main panel or canvas within Aivia. We've got display settings. So anytime I talk about changing how something looks in the viewer, you can do that in the top right there of the window. And then in this yellow portion, this is where you do analysis. So today we're going to dip into this a little bit because the pixel classifier is doing analysis. It's not just changing the display of the data. But anytime we do analysis, it's going to be down in this bottom right portion. I was talking about this bottom panel. So there are a lot of different things you can do down here. Today, we're only really going to worry about the Image Explorer. This is where you can select and load different images. So every time you load a different image, it shows up as a thumbnail at the bottom. You can double click it and the image will reopen. Annotations, we won't really talk about. The outline editor, the track editor, spreadsheet. We're not going to mess with these today. The video animator, if we have time, we will try to create a short video, but it's pretty straightforward. Aivia Community does allow you to export animations. The difference is that within the full version of Aivia, you can have as many keyframes as you like. But within Aivia Community, you have a limit of 4. 4 is a good number to keep you concise in what you want to convey with your video, but it still allows for a lot of flexibility. I like limiting my videos to a very short or a very small number of keyframes anyway, so it's pretty neat, I think. So for the interface, this is in the top right. So if you remember on that slide I showed with the 4 panels, the top right was a red highlight. This is where you change any of the display settings. So you can see we've got quite a few things here. First is the channel display. This is where we're going to adjust the contrast in the window of data that we're showing in the viewer. This is, you have a histogram view and you have some sliders on the histogram you can drag around. Pretty standard feature in any image analysis software. Sorry. We've got something called the object group display. We might dip into this a little bit today, maybe not. We've got 3D display options. These are just some things like turning on and off the bounding box in the viewer, so some convenience functions. They're very easy to tab around and explore on your own. We also have tools for clipping and ortho slicing, which we will talk about today a little bit. Each subsection controls a different group of displays on the image. Okay, so whenever we're looking at this, we're going to see subsections within the interface that controls different things in the viewer. So whenever it comes to the channel display, this is all fairly intuitive once we get in there. There are a few things you can do. So anytime you see an eyeball like this, this means that you can click that eyeball and toggle the visibility of something. So for each channel here, we've got 2 channels in this image. We can turn off one channel at a time by clicking the eyeball. Okay. Whenever the channels are in a collapsed view and you can't see a histogram, you're still going to see these vertical bars on the image. This is adjusting the sliders on the histogram to control the contrast that you see. So for instance, in this image, if your FITC channel is blown out and everything is way too bright, you can click this bar and drag it to the right, and it's going to map the brighter colors to higher values in your channel. If you don't like the colors that are loaded with your data, you can change them as well with these drop downs. And then in 3D, we can see different rendering modes. It's just a really quick overview. It's a fairly simple widget that kind of explains itself once you're messing with it. So if you do have some kind of analysis results in Aivia, there are a few different formats this can come in. Sometimes you create surfaces, sometimes you create tracks, sometimes you create neurons. The whole point of this is to show that within the object group settings, all these things are displayed the same way. So if you have like 3D objects you've created, you've got an objects group. Same thing with tracks, you've got a tracking results group. Same thing with neurons, you've got a 3D neuron analysis group. You still got the eyeballs, and you still got little drop-down buttons that change how the data is viewed. So it's once you learn kind of our philosophy and how we lay this out, it's all pretty transferable to different panels. So when we get to the pixel classifier, we'll talk about all this whenever we're doing hands-on. There's a pixel classifier tab in the bottom right of the Aivia interface. It's in the analysis panel. This works in 2D and 3D. So you've got some tools up here, like you can create a new classifier, you can delete one you're working on, you can open an old one, or you can save this one in many different formats. And we'll talk about some of the different formats you can save in. There's a section that's collapsed by default. So you see this little caret here. Anytime you see a caret like this in Aivia, it's because we're trying to simplify the user interface for you and hiding some more advanced settings. So in the pixel classifier, this one's pretty critical actually. We've got this input and training section, which allows you to choose the channels that you're training on or create more channels to train on. So whenever you expand this, if you have 3 channels and you want to train on the 3rd channel, you can come to this drop down and choose the correct channel. And then your trainings will make more sense. Or you can click this plus button to add more channels to train on. Drawing tools are different ways that you can interact and paint the pixels that you want to segment in your image. Classifiers by default require at least 2 classes. So we give you default classes called want and background. So basically everything you want versus everything you don't want. And you can paint what you want versus what you don't want. If there are 2 different things in your image that look different and that you want to segment separately, you can click this plus button, and that will create a new class that you can also train within the same classifier. And I don't think we limit you on how many classes. Generally, more than 3 classes is kind of difficult to deal with. You can choose whether you want to just create 2 separate classifiers for 2 different main classes, or 2 different segmentations, or have them all in the same classifier. We have this little button at the bottom. It looks like a magnifying glass. Anytime I tell you to preview your classifier, or anytime you want to, you can click this button. This little drop down to the right of it also lets you choose whether the classifier is going to be more accurate or be faster. So this is all giving you access to a machine learning algorithm called random forest. And in random forest, it builds a decision tree. And these decision trees can have what's called depth, which basically determines how thorough each tree is in this forest, and deciding whether a pixel belongs to want or background. If a tree has to branch into more and more decisions, then to a certain limit, there's going to be a limit to this, but theoretically that makes the algorithm more accurate, but it takes longer to compute. So we give you some control over your preview about the depth of that tree, the decision tree, so that whenever you're interacting with and drawing the classes that you want, you can choose whether it's faster to update or more accurate whenever it does update. The images we're working on today, it's actually not going to matter much. This is all done on the GPU, and on 2D images, like one of the ones we're going to look at, it's fast no matter what. It's imperceptible, the difference. So today we're going to mess with the slider a little bit, and you'll see there's not too big of a change. And then finally, we give you some control about how to teach and how to apply. There is a tool to let you only apply within a region of interest. That's what this little box is here. But in Aivia Community, actually, all you can do is teach. There is no apply button. So in Aivia Community, you can't apply a classifier. You can teach them. So if you have a full license of Aivia, you can install Aivia Community on any workstation in your lab, and you can use those workstations to train classifiers. You can then save those classifiers maybe to a central server, and then load them on a main workstation with a full license of Aivia and apply these classifiers. Previewing still works in Aivia Community, so you can see what the results would look like from your classifier in Aivia Community and take screenshots. So that is certainly allowed. We have some advanced options in the pixel classifier. We're not going to talk about this too much. Basically, whenever you're classifying these images, or whenever you're building this classifier, the computer is performing different image transforms on the image and seeing which ones produce the results that you want. And you can choose which transforms you're doing. You know, a lot of these have names like Laplacian, Gabor, things that maybe to biologists it's not apparent what they are. We do have a wiki page that explains what each of these are, and they're all pretty familiar. So if you don't know what a Hessian transform on an image looks like, you can either just click it in here and see what it does, and if it doesn't work, that's fine, you can leave it off, or if it does work, you can leave it on, or you can Google it. They're all fairly established algorithms that you can find examples of online, and actually see what's happening to your image for the decision tree to choose whether a pixel belongs to a class or not. I hope that makes sense. Finally, you can give the pixel classifier some idea of the size of your objects. And this is kind of a nebulous small, medium, large. But if you have tiny things, you can turn off medium and it works pretty well. Typically, I don't mess with this too much. So if you're building a classifier, I would say adjust your paintings first, adjust these features second, and then adjust the kernel size last if you're not getting accurate results. And then if you're still not getting accurate results, maybe let us know and we can try to help you. So the process of creating a new pixel classifier can be summarized like this. First, we're going to choose what input channels we want to look at and consider for the classification. We're going to create the classes that we want to see. So we're going to go ahead and set up a list of classes that we want to classify. We're going to paint examples of each class. And then once we have examples painted of each class, we're going to preview the classifier. The classifier might come back and not be good. And you're going to see, probably what you're going to see is parts of the image are great and parts of the image are not great at all. So this is actually a feedback loop where you continue painting the classifier until it's good. That means you can paint over the preview and then it will readjust the preview, and you paint again and it readjusts. So this is a little loop here. And then once you're happy with this, you can teach the classifier. And then you can save that classifier off to a file somewhere so you can access it for future use. This is all within Aivia Community. So you can do all of this. You only need Aivia or Aivia Web for the final step, which is to apply it. And this creates results that you can measure. So I hope this is pretty clear. Before we switch over to the hands-on session, Jim is going to begin putting links into the Teams chat. If you can't find the Teams chat, let me know. You can hover your mouse over the main window of Teams kind of towards the bottom, and there's a little chat or there's a little toolbar that shows up, and the chat bubble is there. Each person is going to receive a unique link. Please only follow your link. Don't go to somebody else's. AppStream is basically the website that we're using to stream Aivia. So above the Aivia toolbar, you will see like this cream white color toolbar. That's the AppStream toolbar. Depending on your internet connection, there might be a little bit of lag between when you click and when Aivia responds. So every one of your clicks and every one of your mouse movements, if you're in, like I'm in Texas, all of that has to go to California or Maryland to register on the cloud, and then the cloud will send back a video basically of what's happening on Aivia on that server. So that there might be a little bit of latency between what I do or what you do and what the computer responds to. This isn't really an Aivia or an AppStream issue. It's just we're limited by the speed of light at which information can travel, right? And those are large distances. If we do create a video, for some reason, I don't know why, in AppStream, video creation is it takes a long time to render a video. On your workstations, it should not be nearly as long. That's what I've found. But if we do make a video, we'll keep it short for that reason. Finally, if you're in AppStream and for some reason some of the buttons in Aivia are cut off, you'll need to change the resolution of the screen that's being presented to you. So up here in the AppStream toolbar, there's a settings icon. Okay, you can go to the screen resolution part of settings and change it to the full HD, 1920 by 1080. And that should resolve that issue. All right, so if there's any questions, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, look in the chat and find your link that Jim has posted. Follow that link and log into AppStream. If you have problems, we are monitoring the chat, or you can unmute and ask me, and we'll help you get logged in. I'm also sharing my screen of what this process of logging in looks like. Obviously, whenever I log in, I'm going to click the Aivia logo, and it says it takes 2 minutes. It probably will only take 1 minute to fully open, maybe 40 seconds even. Hopefully at this point, everybody's still a little more awake than Nico, who is taking a nap. It's rainy outside here, so I don't blame her. It's a great day for it. But she's also kind of useless. That's all right, Nico. All right, so you can see on my screen, it took maybe 1 minute and 10 seconds. And Aivia is now loading in AppStream. You might need to click on your browser. So if your browser loses focus, it might show that black screen. You might need to click on it for Aivia to actually show. But you should see what you see on my screen, which Aivia has opened, and it's inside a browser. Now I'm going to give y'all another few seconds. Some of you might still be opening. During this time, I'll show you what Aivia Community looks like. So here is Aivia running in a browser. This is the same thing that you would see if you used a full version of Aivia, except it's got all this, the toolbar up here. Here's what Aivia Community looks like running on my local workstation. So it's just about the same. You'll notice in Aivia, the analysis tools panel is pinned. There's this little push pin that's pressed in, which means that the analysis tools panel is permanently on that side. I can do this in the Aivia Community interface as well. I can press a push pin, and whatever panel I push that pin for is going to be anchored to the side. So here's Aivia Community, and here's Aivia Web. Okay, so I haven't seen anybody say that they're having issues with this loading. So I'm going to assume this loaded well for everybody. Let's go ahead and open. Let's open and look at a 3D data set and just do some visualization first. Later, we're going to open a 2D data set and do some pixel classification. So to open data in Aivia, just like any other program, you go to File, Open, and you choose your file. On the cloud here, this is a virtual machine, so it's empty basically, except for what we've already put in there. You can find demo data sets in the shared data drive. in this browser. And then if you go to demo data, there's a whole list of data sets we can open. Oops. Let's open the 3D object analysis demo.avia. So if you double click that, you'll see that it opens in Aivia Web. And everybody should have access to this. Actually, I'm sorry, everyone. Let's open a version of this data set that's already been analyzed, because I want to show you what the clipping looks like with objects created. So we can leave this open. It's fine. Just go back to File, Open, and inside that shared data and then demo data folder, there's this results folder. Let's open the 3D object track demo from inside there. This is another important feature too. So you can see here that we've got tracking results computed for this data set already, and it's been saved. Tracking results can only be generated in a full version of Aivia. However, in Aivia Web, if somebody else or you have been on a different workstation and generated results using a full version of Aivia, maybe from one of our recipes, you can open those results in Aivia Community for free on any workstation and look at the results. So this is another way it's useful, especially in a lab where if you have a lot of workstations but only one Aivia license, you can have Aivia Community on all your workstations, generate results, and then get the person off the main workstation to go look at their results elsewhere and open the workstation back up for other people to make results. Okay, so you should see when you open, by default, Aivia Web is in 2D. Okay, you can tell that if you look at this little square icon on the top left. We also have some sliders down here. So in the main viewer in 2D, we have sliders where I can change the Z number, and we're slicing through a time point in Z. This data set also has a time slider that I can switch through and see both the data and the tracking results in the viewer. Okay, additionally, on this right panel here at the top, we've got this GFP label. This is the channel, or the one channel from the image. You can toggle this on and off by clicking the eyeball. You can also, if you see there are two vertical bars that are very close to each other, you can click and drag these bars and change the contrast. Now in this image, it's been pre-processed a lot. There's not too much contrast. But you can see that if you adjust those sliders, it's changing what you see there. If you don't like green, a lot of people for single channel images don't want to look at something with color because it changes how they perceive it. You can click this color drop down, and for instance, we can change it to white or any other color you like. And actually, when I do that, I do perceive more variation inside each of these objects than I did otherwise. You can see that these tracking results are overlaid on the image. You can turn those off and on, again, down here in the object settings by using the eyeball. Okay, but this is nice and all, but we've got a 4D data set. Let's look at this in the 3D viewer. So to switch to the 3D viewer in any version of Aivia, up in the top left, instead of being in this main view where we have a square that's selected, switch to this 3D view. And you will see a 3D image show up. If your tracking results and your channel are still on, then you see them overlaid with each other. Hopefully that worked for everyone. You'll notice the time slider is still there, where you can click and drag and switch through the time steps and watch these objects move in 3D. You'll notice on my screen, maybe if you're watching it, these objects look a little choppy when I play through. So watch whenever I move to this next time step. We see the objects are first displayed from a low resolution mesh, and then once I stay on this time step long enough, the full resolution mesh is loaded into memory. Whenever I switch back, it happens again. So Aivia is constantly shifting things in and out of display memory based on what you need to see at that moment. And I think we're the only ones out there that readjust the mesh resolution based on the available memory. So this way, if I really want to examine one time step, I can move to that time step. But if I want to play through the time series, these low resolution meshes allow me to see these objects move very quickly and look at their motion and still give me a perception of their shape without being, without the need to load them as full meshes and take up a lot of time. And then as soon as I pause, they come back up to the full resolution again. Toggling visibility of things also works in 3D. You'll see that the segmentation is so nice here that we can't really see the original data since the objects are kind of, they take up the entire volume of the original data. If you turn off the tracking results visibility, then you can see the original data there. You can see through it. Likewise, if you turn the tracking results back on and then turn the original data back off, you get a clearer view of the tracking results. So you can see by now we've got this paradigm where each one of these channels is a row in the channel settings. Each one of these object sets is a row in the object set settings. So if you have multiple channels, each one's a row. If you have multiple object sets, each one's a different row. And within that row, there are more settings than just visibility, obviously. So like with the channel settings, we saw there's visibility, there's the contrast adjustment. So I can change what the contrast is. There's also the color adjustment. There's also the option where if this level of control isn't enough for me, I can click this expand button and I get more control. So I can change the sensitivity of the histogram by zooming in a certain portion of it and being a little more granular in how the adjustments are made. So just like that, everything in an object set here has its own row. So this tracking results is automatically expanded to where you can toggle the visibility of, for the tracking results, the objects, the tracks, anchors, and trends all differently. So for instance, I'm going to turn off my channel to where I'm only looking at my objects or my results. And then turn off your objects, and you can see that there are tracks in there too. And these tracks can be turned off and on as well. And since these tracks occupy their own row, anything else in that row that you mess with will change how the tracks are viewed. So for instance, here I can turn the track visualization length all the way up, and I'll see the entire history of the track. And that way, whenever I play through the data or play through the time, I'll see the tracks build up and be a little more prevalent. Okay, so that's one of the main lessons here is everything's a row. If you want to see something differently, look inside the row of whatever is controlling that thing for your options. That's kind of a weird way to say it. Everything's a row, so like for instance, if I want to see how the tracks are displayed and do it differently, I can look at anything else horizontal on the screen with this tracks label and those widgets I can explore to change how the tracks are viewed. All right, so we've got the 3D viewer. We're looking at that. We've seen the channel settings, how to adjust contrast. Pretty simple. We've seen object set settings. Down here, let's look at these 3D display options. Okay, so go ahead and have your tracking results and your channel both on. And down here in the 3D display options, you'll see a row that says clipping planes and ortho planes, and then two icons with a plus in each of them. The first one is add a new clipping plane. The second one's add a new ortho slicer. Go ahead and click the add a new clipping plane button. And you will see that a clipping plane is placed halfway through the data set in Z, and both the results and the data are clipped. And this clipping plane, I can click this little widget in the middle of it and drag it to change where that clipping plane is placed. You'll also notice that as you do that, this slider in the clipping plane row in the 3D display options panel is changing. So that tells you that these things are interconnected. The little widget that I'm grabbing in the viewer is connected to the slider in the clipping planes row. So if I change either one, the other one is synchronized with it. Okay, and I can explore other things in this, or other buttons within this clipping planes row to see how to change different things. So we've got this button that's called flip direction. If I want to change which way the clipping happens, I can toggle that button. So here you can see I'm clipping above or below the plane. There's also a drop down for axis. And you guessed it, I can choose to clip the X, the Y, or the Z axis. By default, we have Z on, but here's X, and here's Y. Finally, for the axes, you don't always want to clip completely parallel to the axes. So you can actually see in this data set, it's a good example because we've got like this tilted row or this tilted plane of objects. And maybe we want to clip through them as orthogonally as possible. So I can choose one of the axes. Oh, nice. Well, y'all have some free time to experiment while I restore my my Firefox tab. Look at that! Wow, that was quick. That's an interesting lesson. So apparently, if you're using Aivia Web and your browser crashes, your session can resume right when you left off. That's really cool. I haven't seen that before. Okay, sorry. So I'll resume. We were talking about if we wanted to clip these objects orthogonally. So if I choose for my axis, my clipping axis, advanced, then this little widget gets a little more complicated. You can see I've got these different kind of round two-sided arrows. And you probably guessed that means I can drag those and rotate my clipping plane. And then whenever I translate the clipping plane, I can slice through it whatever angle I want. So hopefully that works for everyone. Let me know if you have any trouble with that little widget. The final thing for this clipping plane, oh, we have a question. Where was the advanced option for clipping display? That's all right. Under this axis, so you're creating an advanced axis. So you click that drop down, select advanced, and then the widget lets you control it in any angle you want. Thank you. Finally, next to that, maybe some of you have experimented with this a bit. We've got these separate buttons for volume and mesh, and they're both on by default. But for instance, if I turn off volume, then the volume is no longer clipped. This is cool because I can slice through and add my results while keeping the context of those results in place at all times. Conversely, I can turn off the volume or turn on the volume clipping and turn off the mesh clipping, and then the mesh is always there. So you can control which ones are clipped individually. Jim has a good point in the chat. You can add multiples of these. So I can just keep clicking add clipping planes, and they'll keep coming up. And you can see here that I've got 2 of them active at the same time, and they are both acting. So it can get kind of confusing which ones are which way, but you can design a multiple clipping scenario where you've got maybe only a quadrant of the data with the results shown and others not shown. If you want to get rid of any of these clipping planes, you can just click that row, like I'm going to do with my second row here, and there's a delete button that gets rid of it. And now I am back to just my original. Okay, so a big part of Aivia Community is that you're doing all this for free, and you want to save an image, maybe for publication, maybe just for a presentation to present to your PI or for a grant. And basically, we want to take this visualization and we want to make it nice, and we want to save it. So let's go through that scenario now with this image. How I have it set up, how you have it set up, however you have it set up right now. Let's say we want to save this image. There's a mechanism that lets you export a PNG of this viewer. Something to look out for when you do this. Right now, this viewer is actually a very small part of my screen. And I want to show off my data. I don't want it to be something in the backdrop. So whenever it comes time to save images, I like to maximize the size of my viewer based on the data I have in it. So in that case, that means getting rid of this big panel here, because it doesn't really add any value whenever I want to save a screenshot. A very simple way to do that is to click this blue bar. If you hover your mouse over it, it highlights blue. You can just single click that and it collapses. So now what I want to see actually occupies my entire viewer. The same can be said for this panel over here. In this case, this panel or our data has the square aspect ratio, so I don't really need to collapse this or move it. I can leave it open. It's not that big of a deal. And like Jim said in the chat just now, another thing is that this red highlight of my clipping plane and this widget here. This is useful when I'm interacting with my data, but if I want to save a screenshot, it's not useful in the screenshot at all. So I want to hide that. It's not obvious how to do that. The way you hide a clipping plane from the viewer is you just single click in the middle of where that row is blue. And the clipping plane is still there. It's just not shown. But the clipping is still happening. Okay. This is different from clicking the eyeball. If you click the eyeball here, then the clipping plane is just, it's deactivated, so it's not happening. So I'm going to turn the eyeball back on and make sure that my clipping plane row is not blue. Okay, up here above where we see clipping planes, we see a few different widgets. By default, this bounding box is turned on and the compass is turned on. You can turn those off if you like. So maybe for something artsy, this is a better view. Personally, I leave those on to give some perspective. And when you're happy with your screenshot, you can go to File, Export, Image to Snapshot. You might get this. It doesn't really matter. It's a Windows thing. And this is where you just choose where you want your snapshot to go, and you choose the file type to save as. I recommend PNG, and save it there. If you do want to save this on AppStream, you can go to temporary files and save it. Otherwise, I'm not going to save it right now. All it's going to do is save everything you see here in the viewer as a picture. It's pretty simple. All right. Any questions about saving what you see in the viewer?
Can you go over what you were talking about the bounding?
Go over where the bounding box is?
Yeah, how to toggle that on and
Yeah,
off.
of course. Yeah, I was moving a little fast. Sorry about that. Under 3D display options in this panel here, but above the clipping planes, we see some different toggles. And you can see here, this one is the clipping. The bounding box. So if you just click that, it goes off.
Thank you. And what about the scale bar? Is that something that is going to be included in the exported image?
So down here, yeah, so in Aivia Community, yeah, in Aivia Community, that's going to be included. In the full version of Aivia, you can turn that off in the 3D tools. This overlay manipulator in the 3D tools tab. And I can toggle that off here. You don't have this tab in Aivia Community. So if you're using Aivia Community, instead you have to, what I do is I move the image up like this to where I can crop that scale bar out in post. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. All right, before we move on to the pixel classifier, just like we set up this clipping plane, we're going to set up an ortho slicer. So we saw earlier you can slice through the Z dimension in the 2D viewer, and that's nice, but we might want to do it in the X or Y dimension. So before we do this, go ahead and turn off your clipping plane. So click the eyeball to make it go away in the viewer. just to simplify things. And then to the right of the Add Clipping Plane button, you can click Add New Ortho Slicer. And now, instead of a clipping plane where you see half the data, we see just a single slice of it. And just the same as the clipping plane, you can drag this in the viewer, or you can drag it with this slider. And you can also change the axis. So that's pretty simple. Something I like to do is turn it off except for the volume, and then clip through and show cross sections within the volume. A neat way to give some perspective. Now, what we're actually doing here, we are creating two clipping planes that are just very close to each other, and we're sliding them in unison. They're linked together. If you click this expansion arrow, the caret in the orthoplane row, you can see this thickness box here. If you increase that, you increase the distance of those clipping planes away from each other. So you can actually create a thicker slice, which I think is pretty neat. Okay, so we've covered channels, how to visualize channels. We've covered how to visualize object sets, clipping planes, and orthoplanes. Let's move on to the pixel classifier. Okay, so we've got a good data set to do this on that's deceivingly difficult to segment through thresholding means. If you go to File, Open, you need to go to the shared data drive and go back to the demo data folder. And open the cell count demo file. And we see another single channel 2D image open. Everybody should be able to see this, right? Hopefully. Let me know if you can't find it in the chat. Okay, so for the pixel classifier, we are going to open or move over to the analysis tools panel for the first time. You can see in this analysis tools panel that is pinned to the right side, we've got a few different tabs. Choose the pixel classifier tab. Note that if you are going to use Aivia Community, that analysis tools panel only has two tabs. There's charts and pixel classifier. It's a little easier to find. Okay, so in this tab, it looks confusing, but it gets pretty easy to use. Just like our recipes, just like a lot of the other things in Aivia, it's kind of a top-down thing. You go to the pixel classifier tab, and you look at this very top row. Okay, this is where you can create new classifiers. You can delete the current one. If you have one already saved, you can open it with this button. Finally, we can save it. That actually comes at the end. Next, you need to look at the input and training section. Unless you only have one channel, I think it's essential to always look at this. In this case, we only have one channel, so you can only choose one channel to train on. But if you expand this, you can see here that, like in this case, since we only have the GFP channel, I can train on that. If you're doing something like colocalization, where you want to look at two antibodies and how they colocalize in an image, you can train a pixel classifier by looking at both of those channels and only painting areas where those channels overlap. If you do that using only one channel, then your results are going to be kind of nonsensical. It's not really going to know what to do by only looking at one channel. But once you add that second one in, then it's going to say, oh, well, you want to look at overlap. I'm only going to segment overlap, and your results are going to be much better. So always think about this. If you do have a multi-channel image and you're trying to train a pixel classifier and your results are just completely off, it's because you have the wrong channel chosen. Okay, once you have that chosen, you can collapse this portion, because otherwise it's just kind of taking up space. And it has a little bit of visual clutter if you leave it open. Okay, so you can see here we've got two channels or two classes by default, and we've got different tools to define them. The simplest tool is this paintbrush. We've also got an eraser. We've got a flood fill where you can click and it's going to expand to some boundaries. We've got a lasso. We've got an auto draw mode, which is if you're training in 3D. We've got a magic wand. For this example, let me just show you the way that I always start a pixel classifier. Okay. So every pixel can only belong to one class. You can't have pixels belonging to multiple classes. So what I like to do is paint a very small portion of my image with background as kind of a canvas to then go inside and start adding information about the other class. It's wordy, but what that means is I'll zoom in somewhere in my image, and typically I use the lasso tool. And with background selected, I will left click and drag my mouse and paint in just a few examples of these cells that I want and make sure I include some background. And currently this is all defined as background. But now what I can do is select my want channel and then go inside where I've painted already and define what I want out of it. So I'll use the lasso tool again and paint some of these cells. Note that if you're doing it this way, every single thing inside this background area has to be segmented. I can't exclude some of it or it's going to think it's part of background. Okay, and then once I have this initial painting done, it's very simple. I go to this preview button here, the magnifying glass at the bottom of the panel, click it, and it's going to show me what it thinks I want to segment. Any questions so far on this? I think in a tutorial format like this, explaining all these mouse movements makes this look a lot more difficult than it is. Kind of once you play with this tool a little bit, you'll see that it's very easy to use, I think, once you get kind of the minutia of what to do specifically in the interface down. That's the whole point, is to use machine learning to make our lives easier, right? Can I repeat the last step? Yes, I think the last step was just to click the magnifying glass button, which is to preview, the bottom right. Why do we need to include cells in drawing the background region? So I'll show you an example. So I don't have to do it this way. You don't need to do it. It's good practice, I think, because whenever I go here and I paint the background and then paint the cells on top of it, then you end up with a background and what the want class next to each other. And that way I'm not only teaching examples of those classes, but I'm also teaching what the example of their boundaries look like, so that in the rest of the image, it's going to be better able to separate those objects within the want channel. Does that make sense? Great. Okay, so you can see, I don't know what yours looks like. On mine, it's not perfect, so I need to correct it. Well, we've got another question. If we have cells that have, okay, good point. In this image, most of these cells have about the same intensity. If we have cells that have less GFP versus more, should we do all these cells in training? So I would recommend getting a wide variety. So here, it's very easy to train a pixel classifier on only one tiny portion of the image and have it apply to the rest of the image because it's all pretty uniform. If there's like a shading artifact or a bleaching artifact, or for some reason the exact same structure in one portion of the image has a different signal than another, then you'll need to do a little bit of training in each parts of the image. It's not, whenever you have that situation, this approach is better than like a threshold-based approach. It still might not be perfect. It depends on your image. But using this preview, you'll easily see that, after you train the first part where the intensity profile looks one way and you preview it, you'll see where the intensity profile looks another way, the segmentation looks very wrong. So then what you'll do is, just like here, we see some of these cells aren't very well characterized. You'll start filling in other parts of the image. So I'm going to use my brush tool and go paint elsewhere where I'm missing information and try to correct that. You'll see from my brush tool, my circle is too big right now on my screen to paint. So if I click anywhere, basically it's going to select a cell. It's also going to select some background. So I need to make my brush tool smaller here. There's a way to do that in the GUI using this button here. You can click this and change the radius of that brush. I don't like doing that because it means I have to keep going back and forth. If you hold Control and Shift on your keyboard and then scroll with your mouse wheel all at once, it will change that brush radius for you. And then if you make it smaller, you should be able to paint in some of these missing areas. And see those light up.
Can you repeat that keyboard shortcut?
Yep. It's you hold Control and Shift on your keyboard while scrolling the mouse wheel. If you're on a Mac, it might be Command Shift, or the command button, it might just be not mapped correctly into AppStream. But if you're using Aivia Community on your desktop, it's always Control Shift Scroll. That keyboard shortcut is also included. If you hover your mouse over the radius control button, you'll see that there. I'm actually going to take a screenshot of that.
Okay, I'm still figuring it out, but go ahead.
So if your mouse is hovering over the viewer and you hold Control Shift and then scroll your mouse wheel, it doesn't change the brush radius.
Yeah, I'm using a Mac, so it might just be set up a bit differently.
I think so. AppStream, in past sessions, we've seen that AppStream has some trouble mapping Mac keystrokes correctly. Yeah, so I think if you're trying Aivia Community on the desktop, it'll work better for you. Okay, so hopefully y'all should be getting some results. You'll see here on my screen, we've got a very classic error here, and that's that objects are falsely connected. And dealing with this after a segmentation is very difficult. It's a huge problem in image processing. With the pixel classifier, what I normally do is areas where I see these cells connected, like these little bridges you see here, I will use my background, or I'll turn on the brush tool and select my background, make my mouse very small, and then paint those separations explicitly. And that usually clears it right up. Additionally, you can see some of the edges of my cells aren't that great, so I can start to fill in some edges a little bit. There we go, a little rounder. And then sometimes you'll see small spots in the background showing up. If that happens, you can just paint over those really quickly, and they'll go away. So we've converged on a pretty nice pixel classifier here. It's doing pretty well. It's not perfect, and I see this a lot where the preview is not great, but after you actually apply the classifier, it's great. And that's because the preview is using, like I said earlier, it's only using a limited size of decision tree. So down here in the analysis tools, if you click this drop-down arrow, you can increase this accuracy slider. And I'm just going to turn mine up all the way, and you'll see that it's actually much better. So when this accuracy slider is at 50%, it's not a great representation of what your results will look like. But whenever you turn it up, it should be a lot better. All right, so we've got a few more steps in the pixel classifier. So let's say whatever we have, we're pretty happy with it. And we would like to, first we'd like to see some segmentation results, what those would look like. And we would also like to save this for future use or to go use on our workstation with a full version of Aivia. So right now, if you look over at the two channels that we're painting, you see on the want channel, we've got this confidence selected in the dropdown. That means we're actually looking at a map where each pixel is reporting how confident the algorithm is from 0 to 100% at each pixel that it belongs to a certain class. So the output of that is actually just another image, but it's just cleaned up. So the signal to noise is greatly increased. A pre-binarized image you can think of. If you want to see actual segmentation results overlaid, you can click this drop down and choose segmentation. And then you're going to see what would happen if we thresholded that confidence. It's doing it all in one step here. And this reacts to our paintings, and it reacts to this accuracy slider, just like the confidence channel does. One more thing about this segmentation step, I mentioned this. This segmentation output means that it's taking that confidence map and automatically applying a threshold of 50% confidence or more. If you don't like the results, you can click this drop-down arrow to the left of want. And you can see that this detection slider actually changes that threshold we're using for segmentation. So if you want to segment less or more of that confidence map, you can adjust this slider. And the preview will update accordingly. One more thing, I'm not going to delve too deeply into this, but if you do want to change what features are being used for classification, you can click this little gear widget on the right side of the Pixel Classifier tab. It's kind of right in the middle of everything there. And you can see that you can scroll through all these different features. For this data set, I have to click Laplacian and turn that on, and things tend to get a little smoother. So you'll see that every time I click one of these features on or off, the preview generates for a second, and then it's reflected in the results. Y'all let me know if that's not working for you, or if you need me to repeat how to find that again. All right. Finally, let's save all of our work. So just like we did last time, let's say we want to save a screenshot of what these results look like. We can click this this panel divider here to collapse it. We can scroll with our mouse wheel a little bit maybe to make sure it fits. Whenever I save this screenshot, I don't really want to have my paintings there. Like you can see here that in the middle of my screenshot, I'm going to see this painting. If you don't want to see your paintings overlaid with your preview of the results, you can deselect the tool you were using to paint. So here I had my brush tool selected. I can click that again. It'll go away, and then all my paintings are gone too. Well, they're still there. They're just not shown. And then I can go, just like we did before, to File, Export Image to Snapshot. And I can save what I see in the viewer there of my image. So then I can use that image in publications, whatever I like. For this workflow, the last step in Aivia Community is to save your classifier. So I can save a screenshot of my results, but I can also come up here to this save icon, this floppy disk. I wonder how long floppy disks are going to be accepted save icons whenever there's people out there that don't know what a floppy disk is. You can click that floppy disk, or you can click this drop-down arrow and be a little bit more explicit about how you're saving the classifier. But if you just click this, then you can save this. You can save all your paintings. You can save the classifier that you built with all the features selected, and then later you can reload it, either in Aivia Community or in a version of Aivia, and you can click this apply button. Oh, I'm sorry. Before you do that, there's one more step. You have to click this teach button. Okay, and once you click teach, then you can click save. And you've got a classifier built that you can reuse however you like. All right, so does anyone have any questions about the whole pixel classifier workflow?
I actually have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was wondering, could you give an example of a scenario where you might want to use like an additional pixel class? Like I can see that you would have a want and then a background, but then if you have an additional class, how does that like fall into the classification?
Okay, that's a good question. If you want to follow along or open a data set yourself where you can see that, you can do that here. Otherwise, I'll just show you. Under File, Open, and then back in the demo data folder. Oh, I think it's let me see. It might be the Cell Pro demo. No, it's not this one. Track phase. Actually, I guess the Cell Pro demo is an okay example. So we can see a few different classes of objects in here. We've got these cells that have dim, highly structured centers, and then we've got these objects that have these really bright rings around them, right? So, for example, here, if I wanted to classify those separately, I might create a pixel classifier with an extra class. And I can define a swath of area here. And then go inside that and maybe paint these separately. So I'll paint these things with these bright double membranes as blue. And then I'll paint these other highly structured things as yellow. Okay, and with the preview on, this is what it will give me.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So it still is like it's kind of treating it as like another want class, or it's sort of like keeping it separate from what the other thing is that you might want. I think it makes sense. Okay,
Right.
Thanks.
That's correct. Yeah. And note that your paintings for these have to be completely mutually exclusive. You can't have each pixel belong to more than one class, but whenever I apply this, I'm going to get separate channels of confidence or separate segmentations for each one, and those can overlap. So they're not completely mutually exclusive, or don't have to be. Okay, I think we're pretty much at time here. Sorry, I said that we wouldn't be, but we were. I try not to do that, but we're pretty close to the time. Animations are really simple. You don't have to. I'll just kind of blaze over that really quick. You don't really have to follow along. My object tracking data set is still open, so if I go back to that, you can see that all my clipping planes and everything are still in place. I've still got this data set open. Animations are really simple, okay? All these parameters here, like the channel settings, the object set settings, and the 3D display options, I can set those how I want them to look and click this plus button to add a keyframe. And then I can change the camera and change those settings. Oops. Like this, and maybe even turn off a channel and click a plus button again, and Aivia will automatically, between those two states, basically, it'll transition everything as needed. So if I click play now, that's what happens. Okay, and sometimes there can be like flickering things whenever it's playing as a preview that whenever you render, it's not part of it. I can also change how long this transition takes to happen. So if I make that 5 seconds instead, you see it's a lot slower. And basically in Aivia Community, I can string together any 4 of these. So if I make a few more, then you'll see I've got this really slow animation to begin with, and then it's going to go quickly to those other 2 camera movements I made. Whenever I'm done, I click save. Really simple. And the 4 panels is something that you can use to get creative with, to convey the most amount of information with kind of a limited scope of video, if that makes sense. So that's all I had planned for you. I hope it was helpful. Again, just a reminder, unless I explicitly stated as I did it, all of this can be done in Aivia Community, which is something that you just download for free, put on any workstation you want, and get to visualizing. And we hope that with that tool that you don't have to have a big budget or anything like that to get some really impressive results out. And just as a note, Aivia Community, there's no limit on the amount of data size you can open. So Aivia, we've rendered data sets over 3 terabytes in it before. Aivia Community can do the same. The rendering engine is the exact same. So we really hope that you find this tool useful. If you do have questions about Aivia Community, we encourage you to post them on the Aivia forum. This is an open place where anybody can see your question, and it's public, which means that we're motivated to answer it as quickly as possible, and the whole imaging community can benefit from it as well. So post them there, or if you want, you can contact us directly and we'll help as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Trevor.
Thank you, Jim.
And I would also like to add, for those of you who are here, we've been doing this now. This is the 8th workshop in a series every Wednesday in this time slot. So we appreciate you guys for showing up. I know some of you have been to almost all of them. But in this place, or in this time slot next Wednesday, we're actually launching a new version of Aivia. So I'm sure at this point you've probably received an invitation, but I encourage everyone to register for that event. You can go to our website. There's a link right on there to register. And then subsequent to that, we are going to repeat the workshop series. So next week on the 10th, we have the launch. And then starting on the 17th, we're going to repeat. We're going to jumble it up a little bit. We're going to combine some workshops and then also have additional ones with some of the new features in Aivia 9. But I encourage everyone to attend those again. And at any time, like Trevor said, feel free to post any questions up on the forum as well. And if there's nothing else, if you guys have any questions, if you want to unmute yourselves, feel free to. Otherwise, I'm going to discontinue the recording at this point. And thank you very much.